Hello, hi little creatures. Welcome to Lugal's world. Today we're having an amazing guest here, Laura Perry. Please introduce yourself. She is wildly fascinating. I am so excited for this interview.
Hi, I am the founder and temple mom of Ariadne's Tribe, an inclusive worldwide Minoan spiritual tradition. I'm an herbalist and a Reiki master, and I do living history as a hobby, so like pre-industrial skills, spinning, weaving, hearth cooking, gardening, that kind of thing. So that's me.
So
I
much.
write books. I guess people are interested, but yeah, I write books and I've made a tarot deck.
Links in the descriptions. Please buy all of her books. Buy her tarot deck right now. Stop everything you're doing. The universe will provide the money for it. So maxed out the credit cards. Just kidding. But I do want to know about what are you most passionate about, would you say, these days?
These days, I am most passionate about trying to show people what the world can be like if we choose it. And I am trying to paint that picture via the spiritual group that I am the temple mom of, and via my nonfiction writing and my fiction, because you can paint a picture of a possible world with a story, and then if people like that world, they can choose to do things to make it happen.
I would love for you to talk about that world. Tell us about that world, what it looks like.
Okay, so that world is inspired to some extent by the Minoans. And for those who don't know, the Minoans are often glossed over or left out entirely in history courses, like in your high school history book. So a lot of people don't even know about them. Um, they were a Bronze Age society centered on the island of Crete, which is just south of Greece in the Mediterranean. And they were kind of old-fashioned weirdos, I guess, for their time. Um, they were a non-militarized society who instead put all of their resources, all of their time and energy and money into trade, into making beautiful things and selling them to people. And they had what is called a sharing economy. So they had these giant temples. In the city of Knossos is the most well-known one. Um, and these temples stored huge warehouses full of grain and wine and oil and all kinds of food and drink staples that were then shared with the people in these huge communal feasts that the temples put on, and in and just whenever it was needed. So there have actually been studies done on the people who were buried in the tombs and the graves there that show that everybody of every social class had good nutrition. Food was being shared in
Wow.
plenty with everyone. Um, and so, I mean, it wasn't a utopia by any stretch, but I think there are things we can learn from them and maybe use them as inspiration to make our own world a little better.
This channel has a number of people that are in the intentional community, like Eco Village sphere. I was wondering if you could share some lovely tips and inspirations from the Minoans that they can add to their for the intentional community sphere.
Okay, so the Minoans actually did stuff that looks like intentional communities. Um, in addition to the temples, which were, very similar to the ones in Egypt and Mesopotamia, so they were kind of big bureaucratic administrative institutions. But they also had these smaller places called villas. The archaeologists who found them called them villas, because they looked like the Roman villas that that have been found in other places. But it looks like they were actually sort of religiously based intentional communities. And so I guess the closest similar kind of thing would be maybe some of the rural monasteries and abbeys in medieval Europe. So it would be a group of people who had a similar worldview and who came together to live in a self-sustaining community. And so these places had they had living quarters, they had workshops where people made everything from like carved stone vases to pottery and things like that. They may have made those to use for themselves or to sell, because it looks like these places had visitors. And they had their own food production. So they had their own livestock and gardens and grain fields and their own wine production and olives and orchards. And so while the idea of an eco-village or a similar intentional community is kind of new in modern Western culture, it isn't really new at all. It's something that humans have returned to over and over and over again over the course of our existence. And it works well when you have enough people who have the skills and are willing to share the skills with everyone else in their community. It works very well. There were lots of these villas all over the island of Crete and in several other locations. So this was sort of a blueprint that worked well, that they copied repeatedly.
I want to know, so it's fascinating that you said that humanity has returned over and over again. That means we've left it over and over and over again. Why do we leave this kind of structure if it works so well? What's happening?
So I think what happens is something that in Ariadne's tribe, something that we call big man culture. And interestingly, your name Lugal is actually a Mesopotamian Sumerian word that it's usually translated as king, but it literally means big man. And so there are people who use the term like patriarchy and stuff like that, but we prefer the term big man culture because it's more descriptive of what's really going on, because it's about a few specific people accumulating more of the resources than everyone else. And that is in diametric opposition to a sharing economy, where the only reason for accumulation would be in order to be able to then distribute it to everyone. And so I think what happens is that sometimes cultures become unstable enough that a few big man type figures can gain power. And then one of the many things that they do, and this happens all over the world, this is not confined to a single region. One of the things that they do is actively work to erase traces of other kinds of worldviews, so that it doesn't occur to anyone that they could do it any other way. And so controlling the information is very important. And so that And so it may take a while to find our way back to the other ways because they're not sitting out there as open possibilities.
I just thought that's so fascinating to me because my superego is like the definition of what you just described. That's why I'm projecting the opposite here. That's why I'm showing as many cultures as possible, showing as many different ways of living and kind of doing that because I'm on this duality with that. It's pretty interesting. I wanted to know about, I love talking about death. I love talking about the underworld, the abyss, and I'm just fascinated about it, the gods, the deities, the process. I'm also fascinated about helping people prepare for the death process. So any thoughts that come to you regarding those things would be immensely helpful for both, for our viewers and the channel and everything.
So I actually have been thinking about that a lot lately. I am working up a presentation that I hope to give at a conference next year, and it's about death and dying from the Minoan perspective. And so I started by thinking about what we know from the archaeological record about how the Minoans dealt with funerary activities. So they had an unusual, for their time and place, they had an unusual way of dealing with dead bodies. So they used something that's called secondary burial. This involves it's a two-step process. So you start out with a person who is freshly dead, and this is your loved one who has died, and so you have their body, and it has to be cleaned and prepared for burial. And so it would then be put in a communal tomb. The Minoans built these beautiful beehive-shaped, big sort of cone beehive-shaped tombs. They're called tholos tombs, so it's like an old-fashioned basketry beehive. And I'll get to the deities that has to do with in a minute. And so they would be laid out in this tomb whenever they died. And these tombs were actually the location for a set of seasonal activities. So I'm going to have to back up a little bit here. In the Mediterranean, the climate is different from what it is in most of North America and Europe. Okay, so Mediterranean climate it doesn't have 4 seasons. We're used to like spring, summer, winter, fall. Most of your viewers are probably from the northern temperate zone, I'm guessing. In the Mediterranean, there are 2 seasons, rainy and dry. And so in the fall, in like September, the rain starts, and it rains regularly through the fall and the winter and into the spring, and that is the growing season. Okay, so when the rain starts in the fall, that softens the ground, and the farmers can plow and then plant wheat and vegetables and everything else. And winters are very mild in the Mediterranean, so it all grows through the winter and is harvested in the spring. So this is backwards from what a lot of people are used to. Okay, so harvest is in the spring. So it's this very interesting, in Ariadne's tribe, we call it the blooming time. It's this short little season in the spring where life and death are intertwined. So you have this beautiful springtime Mediterranean island that's just absolutely covered in blooming wildflowers and bees and butterflies, and is and is just beautiful. But it's the time of harvest. So you're cutting down the crop. Ariadne is the embodiment of the grain crop, and that is when she symbolically dies and returns to the underworld. and it is the time to honor, it is a special time to honor the spirits of the beloved dead and the ancestors. And so the people would go to these tombs, and there were big plazas in front of the tombs, and they would have huge feasts. We've got hundreds, maybe thousands of cups and bowls that people left at the tombs from these feasts. So this is shared food, once again, community sharing of resources. And so this is something that happens seasonally, right? And so when these things happen in the spring at the harvest time, they would go and open the tomb up, and they would check on all the remains that were in there. And everyone that had decayed down so that there was nothing left but bones, it would be time for their secondary burial. And so when this happens, you disassemble the skeleton, and this is all done very lovingly. These are the beloved dead. These are the people that you care about, right? And so the skeletons are disassembled, and the bones are carefully laid in rectangular sarcophaguses, and you will have multiple members of the same family, their bones placed in a sarcophagus together. And so that is your secondary burial. And in many parts of the rural Mediterranean, that still goes on today, just very quietly, because the authorities don't really approve of it. But the idea is that between the time of death and the time of secondary burial, it's a transition period for the spirit of the deceased. So while the body still looks even remotely like it did when the person was alive, they might still have some attachment to this world. And only when the body is completely decayed and there's nothing left but bones, and the bones have been taken apart and then lovingly stored in the sarcophagus with the rest of the family, only then is the spirit completely free of this world and ready to move on.
That directly correlates with the spiritualist view in the in like the 1900s about the rite and cremating the body, because it'll still have you'll have like the shell of the soul still like hanging around or something like that.
Yeah. And so essentially there's a lot of interaction with the actual human remains. And that was a regular part of this culture for centuries. The Minoans' ancestors first settled on Crete in around maybe 9000 BCE, and their cities weren't finally destroyed until about 1400 BCE. So that's a long time for people to be maintaining these kinds of practices. And I mean, they started out burying their dead in caves and ended up burying them in fancy tombs, but the practices themselves don't appear to have changed significantly in all that time.
This is what I like to say, that if a civilization is destroying its environment within like 300 years or however many years, and there's another civilization that can last much longer, who's really more intelligent. And so I like to jab at some of this hubris that's going around.
Yeah, I think there is a sense in which people don't like to think about the vast expanses of time that ancient cultures like the Minoans and the Egyptians lasted, because that suggests that we're not working hard enough to overcome whatever problems we've got to make our culture continue. And I can see how that could be overwhelming, but I mean, it's also, isn't it our responsibility to look honestly at what problems we have and try to fix them?
Incarnated to bring Scorpio Mercury energy and just rip off the face off the corpse so everyone can see the stinking flesh beneath it. So that's what this channel is dedicated to.
Yeah, there's some other interesting aspects to the way the Minoans dealt with death. Um, so their ancestors came from Anatolia, modern day Turkey, during the Neolithic era. So this was when farming was first invented, and there were several waves of migration out into Europe and the Near East. And the Minoans were one of those, the people who settled Crete and became the Minoans were one of those waves. And so the time and the place that they came from, if you think of like Göbekli Tepe, that that region, or Çatalhöyük, that's the time and place that the Minoans' ancestors came from. And so that's the kind of worldview that they brought with them, and they were unique. Excuse me, in that they hung on to Neolithic religious practices and some cultural practices all the way into the Bronze Age. So, like, their neighbors probably thought they were those weird, old-fashioned, those crazy Minoans. Yeah, we buy their bronze daggers and their stone vases, but they're just a little weird. But they hung on to that. Obviously, it was important to them, valuable to them. And I think that probably has a lot to do with why they were so successful, because they were able to prioritize. They were able to prioritize their wealth in a different way than cultures around them did, because they had a different set of values.
Stunning. I also want to know about, since this channel is dedicated a lot to like ancient astrology, I wanted to know if there's any stars that are associated specifically with this culture.
Yes. So a lot of the Minoans built a lot of stuff out of stone, and so it lasted. Um, so they built not just the temples. People may have heard them called palaces. They were actually temple complexes, very similar in function to the ones in Mesopotamia and Egypt. So they were like where the priesthood lived, and they were also the centers of administration for the areas that surrounded them. So they had those, and they also had peak sanctuaries on the mountains. Crete is a fairly large island, and it's got a chain of mountains that runs down the middle of it like a spine. And the on the mountain peaks, they built sanctuaries with buildings, and all of them that have been studied, the peak sanctuaries and the temples, and even some of the villas, have astronomical alignments. There is a team of archaeoastronomers at Uppsala University who has been studying this for, I don't know, 15, maybe 20 years. So the Minoans were very exact. This stuff can be measured down to the degree. They cited their buildings based on the rising and setting places, mostly rising, but also setting, of stars and planets. So there are alignments to the lunar standstills, which are the markers for the beginning and ending of that 18.6-year metonic cycle, which that's one of the really big cycles. There's a smaller cycle that is 99 lunations, 8 solar years, and 5 Venus cycles that all interlock. and that is that was one of the Minoan sacred calendars, and there are alignments to that as well. There are alignments to the stars Spica, Arcturus. Shoot, I don't have the others off the top of my head at the moment. Oh, the Pleiades.
Is is Regulus in there or not? Leo.
Not that I can think of off the top of my head, but a lot of this, there's essentially just only been one team doing all of this studying for all of this time. I can tell you that, oh, and Sirius, not just Sirius, but also Orion, and Taurus, the Hyades.
And if you could also, please continue, but also put a link to wherever they can find more information about the astrology of the Minoans. That would be extremely useful for my ancient astrologer friends who are, you know, I have a friend who's learning all of the astrologies from in all of this kind of information.
I'm making myself a note and give you a link to that. Yeah, it's because it's an actual university team with peer-reviewed papers and everything, and they have very generously uploaded PDFs of all of their research online so everybody could access it. And they've done, they have actually traveled to Crete and gotten up before dawn to measure, you know, the sunrise alignments of various places and things like that. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. That's I can just imagine the Minoan clergy like standing on those big rooftops, sighting things through the sacred horns, because they had those giant sacred horns lining all the rooftops, and we think they used them as astronomical sighting tools for the rising and setting of celestial objects. So that would probably have been something that some of the clergy did, like for a living. They would just be up all night and sleep all day and do nothing but watch the risings and settings of the lights in the sky.
That's amazing. And tell us more about the deities in the spirit world of the Minoans.
Okay, so here's my disclaimer. We cannot be absolutely certain that this is the way the Minoans themselves saw all of these deities. The Minoans were they were a civilization that was destroyed by outsiders. They were occupied by the Mycenaeans during the last couple centuries of their existence, and either the Mycenaeans themselves or their hired mercenaries systematically looted and burned all of the cities around the north and east end of Crete, all at the same time, apparently because they were unable to take them over. You know, they did the typical, if I can't have it, no one else can, kind of thing. And then 50 to 100 years later, Knossos itself was destroyed, presumably by some of the locals who were still around and who had finally had enough. And so it was gone, right? There were still people living on Crete, but the government was gone, the religious institution was gone, the infrastructure was gone. And there was infrastructure. The Minoans had paved roads, they had aqueducts, they had enclosed sewers, they had manual flush toilets, they had actually quite what we would call high technology for the Bronze Age. And so over the course of like 100 years, it was gone. And then the late Bronze Age collapse followed shortly after that, and chaos ensued across the entire Eastern Mediterranean. And it wasn't until several centuries after that that the classical Greeks sort of became their own culture, came into their own. And so that's a period of almost 1,000 years between the fall of the Minoan cities and the time when most of the myth fragments that we still have were written down. And most of them were written by people who wanted to use them for their own purposes to bolster the up and coming Hellenic culture. And I mean, that's something that humans do. They take the myths of a prior culture or a conquered culture and they alter them for their own PR purposes. So what we do have that was actually written down is questionable. So what we've done is we've taken the stuff that the Mycenaeans wrote in Linear B back in the Bronze Age, and the archaeology and dance ethnology. We have a dance ethnologist on our board who is absolutely fabulous, and there is a treasure trove of information hidden in folk dance. There is actually mythology encoded in folk dance that survives when it doesn't survive in written form, which is just amazing. So we've put all of that together. And so what we ended up with was not at all what we expected when we started out. The Minoans were not an Indo-European people, so their pantheon does not conform to the typical Indo-European family tree style, you know, that has like the father god at the top and then the human family tree and everybody's married pairs and all like that. What we ended up with is a pantheon with a triplicity of mother goddesses at the top.
You know what's amazing about this interview? I was sunbathing, worshiping the sun, and what came to me was to ask you about Hecate. And because that's right now is the time where I'm creating my channeled message around the triple goddess. So I would love for you to talk about that. This is amazing. This is coming up now. What a synchronicity.
Okay, so Hecate is from mainland Greece, and she is a cousin of the Minoan deities, in a manner of speaking. When the Minoans' ancestors migrated down from Anatolia in one wave of migration, there was another wave of migration that went into mainland Greece from the same origin point. And these people were there before the Indo-Europeans came in, before the Greeks, right? So they were the original inhabitants of mainland Greece, the prior inhabitants. And so a number of the deities in the Hellenic pantheon are actually pre-Hellenic from those people who lived there before the Greeks. And Hecate is one of those.
Wow.
Demeter and Persephone, also a number of them. So Hecate, her triple goddess aspect is apparently later, comes a little bit later, but threes are very important, going all the way back to Old Europe and Neolithic Anatolia. So let me explain to you just a little bit about the Minoan pantheon, and then I'll tell you who Hecate is who Hecate corresponds to in the Minoan pantheon. So we have three mother goddesses, and they correspond with the three sacred realms of land, sky, and sea. So land is the earth mother goddess Rhea. Sky is the sun goddess Tasia, and the sea is our grandmother ocean Poseidaya. And so those are the three mothers who are at the head of the pantheon. And the rest of the pantheon, except for two that I'll get to in a moment, are their children. And so this is, it reflects the way a matrilineal culture might have been organized, with the family matriarchs at the head, And matrilineal cultures tend to have very casual and fluid marriage if they have marriage at all. So none of our deities are married pairs. They are all individuals who are whole within themselves, and they can pair off at times when they want to, but that's not a constant state. So the sun, there are a lot of sun goddesses hidden in mythology all over the place. I will plug a book that is now out of print, but that everybody who's interested should seek out at their favorite used books, the book place. It's called Oh Mother Sun by Patricia Monahan, and it goes into the search for the sun goddess who was there before the sky gods. And so Tasia is the old Mediterranean sun goddess. In the tribe, we talk about tomato Europe and potato Europe. So tomato Europe is the Mediterranean, the southern areas where you can grow tomatoes easily and you don't need a hothouse, right? And potato Europe is the cooler northern regions. And so the two have slightly different climates, and that influences culture and religion. And in potato Europe, your sun goddesses have the two forms of winter and summer. So for instance, in Slavic paganism, Baba Yaga is the winter sun, and the beautiful maiden Vasilisa is the summer sun. They're always a hag and a beautiful maiden. In the Norse, the Germanic, they are Suna and Frau Hola. And in Ireland, they are the Cailleach and Grania or Anya. And so that's Northern Europe, right? So winter and summer. But in the Mediterranean, you don't have that kind of, winter's not the dead time in the Mediterranean. The summer is actually the dead time in the Mediterranean. It's the time when the rain stops and everything dies and gets all crispy brown, and a lot of the creeks on Crete just dry up entirely. It is definitely the dead time. So in the Mediterranean, instead of a winter sun and a summer sun, you have this world sun, the one up above us, and an underworld sun, or the bright sun and the dark sun. And so for the Minoans, the bright sun is Tasia, and the dark sun, the underworld sun, is a deity named Aletheia, and she is the counterpart to Hecate. And Aletheia is she survived into the Hellenic pantheon as a midwife goddess. And that's the only aspect of her that survived into classical times. But she is actually the underworld sun, and she, as a midwife, she stands at the doorway between life and death. So she welcomes the dead and helps them transition to the underworld. And she also helps the new souls transition to this world when babies are born. And one of her roles, which is the same as Hecate in the Eleusinian mysteries, is to be the torch bearer for the daughter goddess in the underworld. Only in the Minoan version of the mysteries, the daughter is Ariadne, and the mother is Rhea instead of Persephone and Demeter. And Ariadne is not abducted. She goes to the underworld during the dead season every year voluntarily because that's her job. She is the queen of the dead. She cares for the spirits of the dead during that season because she loves them, because she is their goddess. And then when the rain starts in the fall, because time passes differently in the underworld than it does in the world above. So her mother has to go down there and tell her that it's time for her to come back up. And so she comes back to our world with the first green sprouts in the field in the fall. And she is the embodiment of the grain crop, and she grows with it through the winter until the harvest in the spring.
I also had a triple feminine deity or energy that was actually was that transitioned me out of the underworld in my own experience.
Oh, wow.
And like a star and whatnot. So it reminds me of mine.
Cool. So
I would really like to know about the parallels between the Minoan collapse and our societies today. I saw in the email that you sent that there was some kind of correlation. And I love, and also if you have anything to say about quote unquote, the end of the world or any kind of energies like that, I love addressing that on my show.
Yeah, I think Byron Ballard called it Tower Time, referencing the Tower card in the tarot deck. Yeah, I've studied the late Bronze Age collapse a lot, and there have been repeated collapses over time in every culture around the world. It's just something that seems to happen. It seems to be some kind of a natural cycle, maybe a cosmic cycle that we're responding to. It does not mean the end of the world. I mean, there were still people in the Eastern Mediterranean throughout the time of the Bronze Age collapse. What it does mean is that whatever power structures people have built up become unstable. And so in the Mediterranean, it was the Mycenaeans trying to conquer everybody all the way around. And some of the cultures in the Near East, also the Mesopotamian cultures, were also kind of trying to expand and conquer, and the Hittites, and everybody was trying to take more than their share of the pie and push everybody else out and build a power structure that nobody else could tear down. And the really ironic thing is, it's only when you try doing that that the power structures become unstable.
Trying is the results of every destruction in this world.
Yes. Yeah, so what I'm looking at is the institutions fell apart. So like the big religious institutions, the governmental institutions, the infrastructure fell apart unevenly. Okay, so this was not like a solid worldwide collapse. It happens unevenly in every era in which there is collapse. And some areas do better than others. But what gets people through it is small local community.
Wow.
Every single time. And that seems to be the key to all of it. If you look at what was going on around the Eastern Mediterranean, in the Levant, in Mesopotamia, even up into the Balkans and down into Egypt during the late Bronze Age collapse, there were still small local areas that were doing just fine. Wow. Because they were able to focus on what they were doing. They were able to look around themselves and say, okay, what do we need to do in order to just keep going, in order to have what we need on a daily and seasonal and annual basis so that we can live our lives in a way that is fulfilling. And so it's It's absolutely the opposite of preppers, right? It's not some dude all by himself in his basement with a bunch of canned food. It is a community. It is connection among people, so that you've got people who have all different kinds of skills that can complement each other and can teach each other. And it is people who are willing to work in a small scale sharing economy, so that everything evens out and the entire community is stable. And that's what gets people through these times.
Magnificent. So good. I want to know about what was the first thing that sparked this interest in the Minoans, and why did you build that spark into a fire, right? To kind of build your life around in a way.
The spark was a page in a book. I was in a ninth grade art history class, and we had this massive book. It was like the size of an unabridged dictionary. And I thought, oh God, this is going to be awful, because there was this massive textbook. And so one of the first few days of the class, the teacher had us open the book, and it turns out that there were these thick sections of color plates, glossy, full color reproductions of art. And so we started looking at cave art, and I just started flipping through, and I flipped through and stopped on a full color, full page glossy plate of the Bull Leaper fresco from Knossos. And I just got full body goosebumps. And I just, it rang every bell that could be rung. And this was back practically in the dark ages, because I'm that old. So there was no internet, and I had to make do with little scraps of information. There was literally like 2 paragraphs in the encyclopedia about the Minoans. And it did become sort of an obsession. I was able to find a book about how Linear B had been translated, which was the writing system that the Mycenaeans had used at Knossos. And I started drawing pictures of Minoan people, because I could find pictures. I found some pictures of the art, the frescoes. So I started drawing, and it never really left me. But, you know, I got older, college and job and family and all that kind of thing. And then I was in a Wiccan coven in my 20s, and I was given an assignment to do for my second degree initiation. And that assignment was to write a year's worth of seasonal rituals and a lifetime's worth of rites of passage using any pantheon I wanted. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to do Celtic, because, you know, I have some British Isles ancestry and this will be good. And every time I tried to do it, it just wouldn't work. I just couldn't do it. And in the meantime, while I was trying to do all this, people were just dropping hints left and right. I would have a conversation and someone would bring up the Minoans, or there would be an article about them. The universe was giving me all these hints, and I wasn't taking them until finally it became too much, and I said, oh, okay, fine. So that was the beginning. That was the early 90s. That was the beginning of my official relationship with the Minoan pantheon in this lifetime. So
I had, like a month ago, my friend Dan, he sent me a picture of the Minoans. He said, I feel like you have some connection here. And that was way before I knew I would meet you and you'd be on the show. So it's fate.
cool. Right.
And I want to know about, there's a lot of witches and, spiritual practitioners that are watching this. We would love to hear any practices we can integrate from the Minoans that you think would be relevant or of note. Any thoughts there?
Practices. The Minoans were an animist culture. They saw the spirit in everything, the divine in everything. The single most prominent aspect of their religious practice is offerings. They made offerings everywhere. They poured liquids. They set items on altars. Somebody dropped a plate of olives into a well in the city of Zakros, and an archaeologist found it 4,000 years later. To me, that speaks of wanting to show that we want to give before we take. So much of religious practice to me today looks very transactional, like saying a prayer to a deity, asking for something, as if the gods were cosmic vending machines. And I think that may be a reflection of the capitalist underpinnings of our culture, because a lot of our relationships with our fellow human beings tend to be a little transactional, and that's probably not good. So, yeah, recognizing the personhood of our fellow human beings, of the other living creatures on Earth, recognizing something like personhood in landscape features, mountains, rivers, the stars in the sky. The Minoans did an ecstatic posture that is called the Minoan salute. It involves, you stand up nice and tall, and you take your right hand curled into a loose fist, and you put the back of that on your forehead while you're looking at whatever it is that you're honoring. And it's a way of honoring. It's like saying, I recognize the divine in you. And so it's a way to salute the sacred in
Right.
in any, in whatever you're, yeah. I'll send you some pictures. There are figurines of people doing it. But yeah, I mean, it's a way of saying, look, the divine is all around us. It's all sacred, it's all alive, it's all inspirited. And if you start from there, if you start with that as your point of origin for making decisions and taking action, then the decisions that you make and the action that you take will be very different than if you did not start from that point of origin.
Wow, beautiful. So let me think. Is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners before we close this out? And I would also like, yeah, just anything that comes to you.
We have some sayings in Ariadne's tribe that are fun, but that also have some depth to them. The first one is, individuation is problematic. In our pantheon, it can be hard to tell whether two deities are actually two separate deities or two facets of the same deity, or maybe a parent and a child, or so it's hard to tell. So we started saying individuation is problematic just kind of as a joke, because it's like a carnival funhouse full of mirrors. as to whether these deities are separate or not. But then we started looking at the world around us, and maybe individuation as problematic applies to the world around us and the world that we are a part of as well. How separate are any of us really? I mean, even from a purely scientific perspective, if the Big Bang is the way everything really started, then the entire universe was originally a singularity. It was originally one thing. And so it's still all one thing. It's all still connected. It's all still part of the same thing. So the Maya in Central America have a saying, "You are my other self." So yeah, individuation is problematic. Maybe separateness is to some extent an illusion. And if we recognize the threads that weave us all together, we are the weavers of each other's cloth. And so if we look at things from that way, then we have a greater responsibility, but we also have a greater joy because we have connection. And joy is the other side of that. Because our favorite thing to say is, together we are joy. And together can be you and me talking here. It can be a bunch of people in a ritual. It can be me and a lake enjoying each other's company. It can be a small group of people and the stars. Together we are joy.
So brilliant. Thank you for everyone who is a part of this show today. Thank you for giving some of your valuable time to commune with us over these beautiful ideas, whether you're from the intentional community sphere or the witchcraft sphere, or you're interested in the end of the world. Please share this video, subscribe, check out the links in the description, learn more about the Minoans, and share this video if this has touched you. And yeah, become a member of our Patreon as well if you'd like to support more beautiful exchanges like this one and bring more guests. And if you have any questions for her for future interviews on my channel, please put them in the description. I read all of the comments, so we would love to hear your thoughts and anything and everything. Share with us. Have an amazing time. Om Namo Guanchen Buso. Om Namo Guanchen Buso. Om Namo Guanchen Buso.